But an individual may follow his own desires. Rather than following the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they follow their own desires. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He means, He says, have you not seen those individuals that they made their hawa, ja'ala rabbahu hawa, that they have made their nafs, their whims, their low desire has become their Lord. So rather than obeying the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they have obeyed their own desires. And within the teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalu salatu wasalam, we say that this is shirkun khafi. This is shirkun khafi. Why? Because you have placed the command of your nafs on the same level of the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah says, don't do it. Your nafs says, do it. So rather than following the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one has followed the command of one's lower self. So you've given equal authority to yourself and to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or you've given equal authority to someone who has commanded you. Maybe not yourself, but someone else has commanded you to do something, and this is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. This is shirkun khafi. You haven't given Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala His haqq, or you haven't worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala haqqul ibadah. Or at times, again in the teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalu salatu wasalam, when they explain the idea of shirkun khafi, even sometimes when we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the reason why we say that we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. While of course, one of the results of our worship may be that we are blessed with paradise, or we are spared from hell. But when we look at the worship of the Prophet, the worship of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalu salatu wasalam, it was from neither of these two things. Not to be saved from hell, nor to gain paradise. As Imam Ali, he says in Nahj al-Balagh, he says, I have not worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of fear of hell, nor have I worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to gain paradise. He said, I worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because I recognize that He deserves, He's the only one that is worthy of being worshipped. Then it's explained that that individual who worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of fear of hell, says this is ibadatul abid. This is the worship of someone who is a slave, because he fears the punishment of someone who is his master. And the worship of that individual who's worshiping to gain paradise, to gain all of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised in paradise, this is ibadatul tujar. He says, this is the worship of a businessman. He said, but that individual who worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with understanding, with ma'rifah, knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He is the only one that deserves worship. This is haqiqatul ibadah. This is true servitude. This is real worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the highest level and form of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you're saying that yes, if someone obeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, obeys His commands to avoid paradise, and they're within the parameters of the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If someone worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and meaning that they obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, doing their wajibat, abstaining from that which is haram, forbidden for them, but they want to gain paradise. They worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they are not on the highest level of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The one who worships without any of these things. And this is, again, one of the beautiful points that is made in Nahjul Balagh, in Dua Kamal that we read. One section it says that, "O Allah, that if you separate me from those who are your beloved ones, and you join me with those who are worthy of your punishment, and you put me in hellfire," he says that, I will continue to praise you. I will continue to speak highly of you. Why? Because that dua, or at least that section of the dua, is teaching us that we shouldn't worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of fear of hell, nor out of want for paradise. But we should worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knowing and recognizing that He is worthy of worship. And this is why it states that if I'm in that state, it says, I'll bear the heat of the hellfire. I'll bear the punishment. But how can I bear the separation from you? The wisdom in that, he says, he's not saying, how can I bear not to be in paradise? No. Bear to be separate from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whatever happens, happens, but I want to be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the worship of a true servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the worship that Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, he wanted to exemplify in the plight of Muharram, of him going to Karbala. And and we see this from the whole journey, that when things became difficult, of course some people advise Imam Hussein, why don't you flee, why don't you go somewhere, why don't you go and hide? The place that he went to Mecca. Before leaving from Mecca, he went to make a ziyarah to the grave of Rasulullah. And from there he went to Mecca, again towards worship, towards ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, to read the history in its detail, which unfortunately we don't have time in these short moments of the 10 majalis, 11 majalis that happens, but after this you go and you read the history, read the details of what happened along the journey of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, the du'as that he made. With du'a mukhul ibadah, as is stated in the words of Ahlul Bayt, that du'a is like the kernel of worship. It is the kernel of worship. The dua that Imam Hussein he made along the journey, and even the dua that Imam Hussein, subhanAllah, to show that, again, this point that we're making, that one of the missions of Imam Hussein is to exemplify the highest level of ibadat, of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that even as his enemies faced him while he was alone, that all of his companions had been martyred, all of his family, his entire family had been martyred. Imam Hussein, he stood before the army of Umar ibn Sa'd, the army of Yazid, and he said that, that I am the son of Ali, the son of Fatima the Zahra. And that if I supplicate, if I make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that my dua is answered. They affirmed. They said yes. So Imam Hussein, he offered, when everyone was martyred, everyone is killed, he says, that my dua is answered. He says, then I ask you to leave what you're doing now. Stop what you're doing. Do not, again, seal your fate and your doom by killing me. And I will make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that for all of this atrocity that you have committed, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives you. He offered this. You've killed everyone. My dua is answered. You know, and you affirm. Back down now. I'll make dua that all of this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives you. And imagine that. That someone is such a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing that it's better to forgive. And in a situation that here your brother has been slain, your son has been slain, your nephews have been slain, your companions have been slain, and to offer such an offer that I will make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this is forgiven, that this is not held against you. Again, this, if we look at our own selves and think that how would we be in that situation if someone has done a wrong to us, has wronged us? That could we exemplify such ibadah, such servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That what would please Allah more is to try to, again, amend the ways of others. This is part of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy al Munkar, to enjoin good and forbid that which is wrong. This is part of that mission that Imam Hussein, he mentioned from the very beginning. But when they refuse even to accept this offering of Imam Hussein, of course he had to go forth, because a part of ibadah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he also mentions within the Quran. He states, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. That he has delegated and he has sent forth to each ummah, to each nation, a prophet. And the mission of that prophet was to, again, establish the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He himself would worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and establish the worship and servitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَاجْتَنِبُ الطَّاغُوتَ. And to, again, abstain or to defy, or in fact to liberate mankind from tyranny. So an important part of, again, ibadah and worship is not only to prostrate, to bow, to make hajj, to do these physical forms of ibadah, but also to abstain from tyranny. One, not to oppress others, and to alleviate others from oppression. This was the mission of the prophets. This is the mission of those who, again, walk in the footsteps of our prophets. To establish the servitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To remove oppression and tyranny from the world. And this, again, is one of the pivotal points about, of the duty of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy al Munkar. As Imam Baqir alayhi afdalus salatu wa salam, as he states in one statement, he says, إن الأمر بالمعروف والنهي عن المنكر فريضة عظيمة تقام بها الفرائض. He says that Amr bil Ma'ruf, enjoining good and forbidding what is wrong, he says this is a great duty and responsibility. And by fulfilling this duty and responsibility, other forms of worship are established. That all other forms of worship, whether it's the salat, whether it's the fasting, whether it is the hajj, they're established and founded upon enjoining good and forbidding what is wrong. Because if this is not fulfilled, then there will come a time when there may be a tyrant who wants to do away with the salat, do away with the hajj, do away with fasting, do away with the duties that one wants to do. And we see this in history. They would take a group of Muslims and they would turn their belief and their faith upside down. They would turn the practices upside down. And if you want to look in recent history of Ataturk, what happened? The history of the Shah of Iran. If it had not been for Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar, then the worship that exists in Iran would not exist today. Because in Turkey, Ataturk, he was successful with his actions, and there was no one to stand up to do Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy al Munkar, to enjoin the good and to forbid what was wrong. So all other duties are established upon that. And this is why also the Prophet, he says, A'abadul nas, the person who is most subservient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, man qama fara'id, whoever, the individual who establishes the ibadah, the specific ibadah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has made incumbent upon you. And the only way to establish that is to do Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar. That if those acts of worship, the salat, the fasting, the hajj, if they are in threat, in danger to be erased and eradicated, then one must do Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar. And by doing so, that individual will be A'abadun nas, the most subservient individual to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This was the plight of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. To exemplify the highest level of ibadah, of servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by doing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar, by ensuring that the salat will continue to be established, by ensuring that fasting would continue to be established, the hajj and all other of the ibadah. This is the reason for which all of the companions and the family of Imam Hussein, they went forth to sacrifice their lives. They went forth to make sure that the salat would be established. That when they made salat on the battlefield of Karbala, and the other side did not. That if one thinks or takes the salat lightly, then one should ask, how come Imam Hussein did not take it lightly? That while arrows and spears were being thrust in his direction, he continued to pray. When the companions, they had all went forth and they had been slain on the battlefield, then Bani Hashim, they began to go upon the battlefield to protect the household of Rasulullah. They went upon the battlefield under the authority of Imam Hussein, with the same mission of Imam Hussein, and that was to protect Islam, to protect the ibadah, the servitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Among the individuals of Bani Hashim who went forth were two young boys. It's not only those who were old, but even young boys like Aun and Muhammad, the sons of Zainab al-Kubra salamullah alayha. At least Aun was the biological son, and they say Muhammad was at least the stepson of Zainab al-Kubra. that they went forth upon the battlefield. And they went forth with the blessings of Zainab al-Kubra salamullah alayha. That she wanted them to go forth and to protect the household of Rasulullah, particularly Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
She stated, for if they did not, then she would feel ashamed. That she would not be happy. So Muhammad and own, there are various stories about when they went forth to ask Imam Hussein for permission to go onto the battlefield. One story says that they went forth, they asked Imam Hussein, and when he looked down at them, he would think of his sister Zainab al-Kubra. I think that how could he take these two young children and allow them to go onto the battlefield to sacrifice themselves? That Zainab al-Kubra, as is stated in the history, that she's Ummul Masa'ib. She's the mother of tragedies and calamities. Because Imam Hussein, he knew that after his martyrdom, that Zainab al-Kubra, that she will be captured, she will be taken from Karbala to Kufa, to Sham, that she will be mistreated, that her hijab will be taken from her. And now to allow these two young boys also to be taken from Zainab al-Kubra, that he looked and he said that initially he denied. He says, no, go back. How can I allow you to go forth, that you are young? And war is not incumbent upon you because of your age. Owen being 13, Muhammad being around 11. Said, this is not obligatory upon you. And one of the narrations is said they went back and they were saddened. And when Zainab al-Kubra, she saw that they were saddened, Zainab al-Kubra herself, she came to her brother Imam Hussein and asked Imam Hussein that allow my sons to go forth and to sacrifice themselves. Allow them to go forth and protect you, to protect the household of Rasulullah. And one narration says that Imam Hussein looked at Zainab salamullah alayha. He says, how can I do this? That this will be difficult for you to have your sons to go forth. And Zainab al-Kubra, she responded, she says, oh my brother Hussein, have I not been like a mother to you after our mother has been martyred? He says, yes. She asks, oh my brother Hussein, and all the time, have I asked you for anything? He says, no. He says, so now I have one request, and that one request is to allow my sons Muhammad and Owen to go forth, to protect you, to protect the household of Rasulullah. And in one narration it says, after that he allowed